Okay. So what we will be discussing today are the known export formats for working in CIOC and also the import tool, so for bringing records between CIOC databases. I'll start with discussing our CIOC sharing format, which is the official way to get data between two different CIOC databases. That is really the only purpose of that particular export format. It's not very well designed for use in reporting or any other type of use other than sharing between CIOC databases. It's the most comprehensive export format that we have in that it preserves all of the data structures that are in CIOC. This is in contrast to many of our other export formats that what we call flatten out the data and combine multiple components of a field into one sort of lump of text, the same way you would see it if it was displayed in your record details. Although the sharing format is primarily designed to share between CIOC databases, it is used by some external systems, both into and out of CIOC. If you do use CIOC, the sharing format, to exchange data with another system, you should make sure that we, Chris and I, are aware of it, and preferably aware of exactly how you're using it. We can't be sensitive to the particular needs you have with an external partner if you don't tell us that you're working with an external partner. Because we are aware that these changes happen, we do publish the changes, or when we anticipate changes, to the CIOC alert list ahead of time so that people can prepare for the changes. But this is not a static format. It does change. We change it as little as we can. But if you are using it with external systems, you have to be prepared to make changes when the format changes. The CIOC sharing format is based on an export profile. So the export profile allows you to pick specific fields, publications, and headings, and distributions to include in the data that you export from one system to another. Anything that you do not include is not updated as part of the import process. So if I'm only including the fields organization name, description, and phone number, then any of the other fields that are in the database that I'm sharing to will be preserved as is. So the system only updates things that are shared. And that means if you want to keep some information private in your system, like have your own copy of the internal memo that you update for yourself, then your partner could not send you the internal memo and you would be able to keep your own, for example. The sharing format is the only way to import into CIOC. If you have any other format, you have to work with us to convert it into a sharing format to get it into CIOC. There's no other way to get data into CIOC. I have a question. Give me one moment. Oh, and now it's gone. Oh, it's the, apparently the community site is up. There we go. So if you need this, this PowerPoint under the resource section, go to CIOC version 3 project documents, and it has all the session PowerPoints. So this is number 12. Those PowerPoints are made available by the Wednesday before each session. Okay, so the other format, the Microsoft record set format. This is our oldest export format that we have in CIOC. It's also not really human usable. It's in a proprietary Microsoft format called the Microsoft record set, saved record set. And it's really designed to come into Microsoft Access relatively easily. In order to do that, though, you do require a special access tool that we make available for download. Should be, I think I linked to it here somewhere. There. On the last slide, link here that teaches you how to use the Microsoft saved record set and bring it into Microsoft Access. So if you've never done that before, there's a how-to document on it and a download of the tool. But the Microsoft saved record set format it's flat, meaning it doesn't preserve any of the original structure that's part of your CIOC records. So If you take, say, the languages field, it's not going to preserve all of the individual languages checklists that you'd put in. It's going to give one big blob of text in the same way you would see it if you were viewing the record in the record details. So each record only takes one row in one table in our Microsoft Save Record Set format, and therefore you cannot reconstruct a CIOC record back into your CIOC database based on this format. Okay, this is not fit for coming or sharing between CIOC databases at all. So there are two versions of the Microsoft Save Record Set format. Version 2 is the current one. Version 1 is officially deprecated, meaning you should not be using it because it will go away. Version 1 is never updated ever except to keep it working. And version 2 uses export profiles. So any of the export profiles that you make for the sharing format, you can also use with your Microsoft Save Record Set format to only export specific fields. The newest format is the Excel format, and I think a number of you have dived into this area because it is a pretty simple and useful tool. The Excel format allows you to create something like a profile where you pick the fields that you want included. You can also pick a sort order so that you can determine the order in which the records occur, which is something you can't do with any of the other types of exports. And it allows you access to more fields than any of the other types of exports because anything that you can display in your software, you can also output to Excel, and that's not the case with our other formats. So even the CIOC sharing format doesn't provide all of the types of export that the Excel export does because we have certain kinds of fields that are generated or special versions that we've made for doing printed reports like just the contact name by itself or just the contact phone by itself. Those aren't things that you can pick in your export profile. So Excel export is actually one of the more detailed formats that we have because you have a lot of flexibility about what you're including and what you're not. That said, it's still a flat format. One row means one record in the database, and that means that things like the languages checklist, the areas served are all blobbed together as one big chunk of text. So you do lose something, and again, this is not a format that you would ever be able to bring back into CIOC. You can't export to Excel, modify it, and bring it back into CIOC like you could with the sharing format. Okay. The setup of an Excel export is actually, if you haven't done it, is very straightforward. I think I have one ready to go here. This is what the setup looks like. So you can specify if you want column headers, if you want as the very first row in the file to be the name of the field, either using the CIOC field name or the friendly label that you've given it. So let's say I've renamed the internal memo field to be, whatever it is. Let's say I've renamed the comments field to be INR Bulletin. So if I use the friendly name, it's going to come across as INR Bulletin, and if I use the field name, it's going to still come back as the old comments field. You can specify which views the Excel profile is available in, and that means anyone in that view would have access to it. So this is different from other types of permissions for export. You do not have to have export privileges to use an Excel profile. It just has to be available in your view. Be aware of this. And then finally, you can pick the fields by specifying a column order of the ones that you want to choose and a sort order. Note that any of the ones that you've picked will come up to the top, so you don't have to scroll down to see, which ones have I actually picked. Anything that you've picked to have in the profile will come to the top. I have a question. Sharon's saying, I'm assuming that this is only found on the CIC side. So at the moment, all of our export tools are CIC only. I don't believe I made, there's no export capability on the volunteer software at all right now. But the reason that I made this session open for volunteers as well is because I would like to know which, if any, of these types of tools the volunteer users would like to have. In most cases, it's not going to be a tremendous amount of work for us to make them available for the volunteer software. In fact, the easiest one to make available is going to be the Excel export, which is the one that I think volunteer users are most likely to want. It actually will not take very much work at all to give that feature. Okay. And we also have some deprecated formats. I talked about one. The deprecated means it's officially going away. It hasn't gone away yet, but officially it's going away, and you shouldn't rely on it because any time now it could go. We've been saying that these two formats are deprecated for years now, which means it's only a matter of time before they go away. It costs CIOC money to maintain them. They don't get any of the new fields that are added. They don't have any of the security that has been added to the other formats. So these formats are going. If you use them now, you should do everything possible to convert to something else because they are going away. They're only there to help people in the transition. So the two formats I'm talking about are the Saved Record Set version 1 and the Database format. If you go into the Excel, or the export, you'll see right here, please note that the formats below are deprecated and may not be supported in future software releases. So these are the two. Do not rely on either of these two formats because they will go away. Okay. Any questions about the existing tools that I can answer before we get into known issues? Anything, if you're not clear how they work or you would like a little bit more information about what these tools are for before I get into the known issues section? Okay. Feel free to ask questions at any point. I'm watching for the little flash telling me you have a question. Okay, so known issues. These are in pretty random order, so pardon me if it seems like they're jumping around a little bit. The existing CIOC sharing format is not compatible with the long-term needs of the software. So the original design did not accommodate the way our software has changed over time. In particular, it's terrible for multiple languages. So it's very likely that we're going to have to throw away the whole format and start again. Because so many people depend on the sharing format, and because we know we do have other software types using this sharing format, we try and change it as little as possible from one release to another. But what that means is we're not doing it in the best way we could because we're trying to stay the same. It prevents us from doing the best possible format that we could. So at some point we just have to say, okay, we can't keep sort of tweaking the existing version or the existing format because it's just not working, and we're going to have to start all over again and have the format work in a very different way than it does today. It's completely not expandable to other languages, and even recently what I've been working on for the next release of the software is the ability to export just in English or just in French, even if you have both in the database. And what I had to do to make that possible was not nice. I basically had to create 3 different copies of the export format, one bilingual, one English only, one French only. This is terrible design, and we can't continue doing that, but that was the only way that we could cope with it with the current format. So that means that we're going to have to make a massive change at some point soon to make it a long-term sustainable format. As I mentioned, the original format did not account for records that did not have English values, and that's because our software started off with just English, and then it became English and bilingual, and then when it became English, bilingual, or French, we had no way of dealing with those French-only records. So what we've had to do to accommodate French-only records has not been pretty. It's not a good design. And although we can make it functional, we can make it work so that you can export a French-only record, it's not ideal. And even worse, as we're adding more languages into the software, so as the next release we put in basic support for dozens of other languages, but we have no way to export or import them because the format that we have is completely incompatible with adding new languages. Okay, and another big issue is that I touched on is that the format that we have doesn't really cope very well with being backward compatible. So every time we update the sharing format, everybody has to scramble to get up to date and always be on the most current version because we have no ability to support prior versions of the format. Part of that is just the design of the format isn't very good for dealing with version changes, and part of it is that it's usually a pretty major reconstruction of a field. So there really isn't, it's very difficult to make them compatible from one version to another. But we do want to make it easier to support older versions if we can, or at the very least have a way to ignore things that we can't deal with. And right now we can't do that. So even if all we've done is add a new field, what the software should be able to do is ignore it and say, okay, I don't recognize this field. It's not, it doesn't exist in my database. I'm not going to import it. What happens now is the whole software goes, no, I don't recognize this field. I'm not going to import anything at all. So that's something we would like to change. And again, this is all related that the current format needs to be discarded and redesigned from scratch to account for CIOC's long-term needs and to make future format changes less difficult for external systems. So it's quite easy for CIOC to go to CIOC because they're on the same version. You as a CIOC user don't have to do anything in order to accommodate the change. As long as the person you're sharing with is on the same version of CIOC as you, it's fine. But the problem comes in if you're sharing with your local CCAC or someone else that has tried to make use of this format, either to give you data or to take data from you, and the format changes, it's more difficult for them to have to cope with that. Any questions on any of those items so far? So those are all focused around our sharing format, obviously. We have no ability to easily identify records that have changed since the last time you exported. The sort of ideal vision for this is it should work like getting transactions from your bank. For those of you who do some kind of banking software, you log into your bank and you say, give me the transactions since the last time I downloaded the transactions. And it knows when you last got the transactions and which ones you downloaded, and it will only give you the ones that are new since the last time you downloaded. So right now, people have to do various queries and guesses to try and get the right records to know what has changed since the last time they sent information. What we're trying to avoid here is if I share 5 or 10,000 records with someone and I don't want to have to send them 5 or 10,000 records every single week or bi-weekly. I only want to send them the ones that have changed in the last week or 2 weeks. I have to figure out how to tell which ones have changed. The problem is determining what has changed, because any little tiny touch on a record changes the modification date. So that's not a reliable way to know if that record has changed. Let's say I have some kind of an internal field that is only for me and isn't something I export to that other partner. It's still going to change the modification date, but the data I send them is actually going to be exactly the same because I haven't made any changes to the fields that I share with them. We've built in to the community information side anyway, a field history system. So for the benefit of our volunteer users, I'm just going to explain what the field history system is because they won't know. Actually, I'll do it in my own one here, assuming it's working. Okay. So the field history system tells me all the changes that I've made to a particular record and what fields I changed each time. Okay. So it'll give me a full list of the date and which fields were changed by which user. And if I go into the details of that field, I can actually click on any of these particular items to see the full thing. It will actually show me any past changes that I've made to that particular field. Find a good one here. I can compare two different versions. So in this case, I can see I took out Hamilton and I added and I left Toronto. So it's turned it red. It's put a slash through it to tell me that I took between this revision and this revision, I took this particular thing out. Because we have that level of detail, it's actually possible for us to tell. Let's look at your export profile. Let's see which fields you export. I can go and look at each record and say, have any of the fields that I export to you changed in this record since the last time I sent it to you? So it can do some really smart checking about whether or not it needs to send the record or not, since it has that level of detail of knowing did that particular field change since the last time I sent it. We also want to have the option to export records changed since a specific date. So it's not enough to do, show me all the ones since the last time I downloaded. You want to be able to say, show me anything that has changed since January 1st and actually specify it or give a specific date instead of just the last time I did it. And this would really cut down on the number of records sent to partners. So unfortunately, the guesswork that we do now does one of two things. It either sends too many records or it doesn't send enough. And it's usually a combination of the two. So you end up accidentally not sending some records that were modified just because you maybe pick not quite the right date to check the modified date. It's really easy to miss out on some records and then that record doesn't get updated. And it's really easy to send too many because the modified dates overlap or because the change that I made was really insignificant, didn't apply to anything that I'm sharing, and I have to send it anyway because I have no way to tell. So by taking or to do the checking for you about what's changed and what hasn't, there's no guesswork involved. And the number of records that are sent will be more accurate. You will not only be sending everything that needs to be updated, but you will not be sending things that don't need to be updated. And we would like to have the ability to make import-export automated. So rather than having to send a file, once we have all these tools in place where the software can automatically detect what has changed, it would be possible to set up two CIOC databases to synchronize records between each other so that it would only send the particular updates either as they were made or on a particular schedule from one database to another, instead of someone actually having to do an export and then at the other end someone having to do an import. Any questions on any of those items on this slide? Okay. If you think of something, go ahead and type. Okay, next. We want to give people more control over what they, I have a question. All right, one moment. Sharon, is the field history available on the volunteer side? No, not yet. That's why I showed it. So we want to make it available in the volunteer software, but it's not yet. That's certainly something that we want in place. I got you excited. Yeah, so that in the long run, yes, we intend that to be available on the volunteer side. It's not yet. And as we make a number of changes that are in progress right now to make the volunteer side work more like the community information side, that will just come almost for free. So I expect it to happen pretty soon. Okay. So we want to have more control over what gets imported into the database. So right now, when you run an import, I'm going to Should have import up here somewhere. You can make very few decisions about what you're importing. You can pick particular agencies. If there's privacy profiles, you can decide what to do with private data. You can pick a number of records to import. And that's it. That's your entire ability to choose about what you import. You can't say, I want this record and not this record. You can't say, only import these fields and not these fields. There's no control on the end of the person importing the data about what they import. They either take the data as it is or not. So what we would like to do is give people a little bit more control so that they can say, I only want to import the French versions of these records, not the English, even if they were provided. I only want to import these particular publications. I only want to import these particular fields. I only want to import these particular records instead of having to take everything as is. This one's a big one. And we can actually solve this next problem. Has been a problem for a long time, and it actually was a problem for a long time because we were trying to support a really old version of the CIOC sharing format, really old version, which couldn't handle these changes. At this point, I believe that that's no longer an issue. Julia would have to confirm for me. I believe since I don't think that Find Help is running any really old versions of the of CIOC, and so we can actually try and solve this problem now. So the issue is, if I send a record with a deletion date, I delete a record and I send it to Find Help for 211ontario.ca. They get it with a deletion date. It gets deleted in their database. Then I end up restoring the record. It's not deleted anymore, and I send it again. Well, I'm sending it with no deletion date. It stays deleted in Ontario CIOC. And the same holds true for non-public. Let's say I temporarily set a record non-public because it's really out of date. We've had a lot of trouble getting a hold of the people to update it, so we're temporarily setting it non-public. Then I get the information I need. I can make it public again. So I go in my database, I make it public, I send it again to Julia, and it stays non-public in her database. If a record is deleted or non-public in a receiving database, meaning the person who imports the record, it stays deleted or non-public. And that's to give the person who receives the record some control over where that record gets accessed. So let's say it's public in Niagara's database and it gets shared into Halton's database and they want access to it, but they don't want it to be a public record in their public website. They just want it for staff. Well, there's a very good reason under those conditions for them to keep it non-public, and so we don't want it to, keep going public every single time they import it. So there's a reason why we do it this way. The problem is that in cases like the information that's going to 211 Ontario, they can't tell that you have changed the record back to public. So unless you explicitly indicate to them that certain records have now gone public that used to be non-public, or that you've restored records that used to be deleted, it can really end up causing a problem, and that record will maybe not be restored or public when it should be. So what we want to do is give a choice during the import process that allows people to see which records have flipped, meaning this record is currently not, but when I import it, the importing record says it should be public, and then you get a choice. I want to take the status of it coming in, or I want to keep my status. Any questions on that process? I think any of you who do sharing to 211ontario.ca already know this problem, so hopefully it's familiar to you. Okay, set the block email update request flag on imported records. For those of you who do not use block email update request, this is a field that allows you to say that a particular record does not want to be sent email update requests. So they don't want to get emails saying, come update your record. And what we would like to be able to do is automatically set that flag on any imported record. Because if you are receiving records from a partner, they are the source of that information, not you. And therefore, you shouldn't be automatically sending out email update requests for that record that you don't own and that you don't update. And by putting the block on, you can prevent that from happening accidentally. Any questions about any of these known issues? Okay. Next. I've already touched on this, that we need to get rid of the deprecated formats. Cost CIOC money to maintain them. They have security problems, meaning they always give anyone with export privileges access to every field all the time. So they have security problems. They don't get updated. They don't get any new fields. They need to go away. And potentially we can have a transition period where they get hidden by default, but we can allow activation on a case-by-case basis for people that are still really using them, while still making it clear that this format is about to go away. In any case, no future development is happening on either one of those formats ever. And we don't support them really either, other than if the file generates, that's about the support you can expect for those formats because they're deprecated. We won't do any work to make sure that they work properly because they're supposed to go away. Every export format that we do keep in the database is going to need to be updated to support additional languages. So beyond the English, French, bilingual, because we're going to allow support for other languages of records, we have to decide how to allow exporting to happen in those other languages. So that applies to the sharing format, but also to all of the other kinds of exports that we do. I don't think there's any questions on there probably, but let me know if you have any. This is our last slide of known issues, and then we'll have some open chat. I talked a bit about the security of having all the fields available. So right now the Microsoft Saved Record Set Format version 2 allows you to use export profiles but doesn't force you to use export profiles, and that is a security issue. And what we would like to have it instead is that you have to pick an export profile, and then in the setup you can say which views have access to which export format. And therefore you would have control if you had a leased view, let's say, and you wanted to allow them to do some exporting in that format. By forcing them to use export profiles, you could be very clear about which fields they're actually allowed to have access to. And this should extend to privacy profiles, which again is a security issue with that format, and our deprecated formats is they don't support privacy profiles the way our Excel profiles and the sharing format do. So there is a privacy and security concern until we address those by updating them. I discussed this at the beginning, but the Microsoft Saved Record Set format requires a special tool to convert it into a Microsoft Access database. If possible, we would prefer to just output to a Microsoft Access database instead of making you output to this format and then using our tool to convert it into a Microsoft Access database. In the meantime, I've provided the link to the tool and the instructions on how to use it for anyone who isn't familiar with that process. And we don't know if there's a desire for this or not, but we don't have any kind of nice, human-readable, simple XML format. All we have is our sharing format, which is extremely cumbersome and complicated, and this Microsoft Saved Record Set format, which is really intended only for a machine to use and is not friendly or easy to look at or work with. And again, you need a special tool to bring it in to another program like Microsoft Access, and it's incompatible with other kinds of tools that might work well with XML. So if there's a desire, we should be considering a very simple XML format that might be able to be used with other tools rather than the two that we have. That's it for my list. What I'm going to do now is unmute everyone on the call. If you do not intend to speak or you're not speaking now, I encourage you to remute yourself to prevent background noise. And if you are unable to talk because you don't have a microphone, it's not working, you haven't entered your audio pin, whatever the case may be, you can simply type in the questions area instead. Okay, everyone's getting unmuted now. The noise begins. So, there's no questions in the questions panel. So if anyone has anything to say, feel free to talk or type.
Well, it's Leslie. Since no one's talking, I'll talk. You know I always will talk if no one's talking, and even sometimes when someone is talking. I would say that we certainly have no problem with getting rid of the deprecated stuff. We don't use it. That's fine with us. We find the Excel format to be very useful, both to provide data to people on a lease basis and also just for purposes of oh Lord, my brain has gone blank here. You know, being able to blend, to meld together fields into other documents and so on. God, what is that called? That's horrible.
Merge?
Hmm?
A word merge?
Merge. This is the one I was trying to think of. And I absolutely affirm, since we're trying to do quite a lot of data sharing, not only just to find help, but also within our neighboring colleague groups, that anything that would make it easier, I'd be eternally grateful for. We have a reasonably okay system in the works to make it better, but it's a beast. And so having it, however automated it may be able to be made, and certainly to have it so that once it's set up, that it can happen with simplicity, will be a really big advantage.
Okay. So Sharon, you had said you thought you'd have some interest in the Excel tool.
Well, that's what we use Excel here, and the word that I was going to use, exactly as Leslie says, is we do a lot of mail merging and email merging, and definitely Excel talks very well to what we need to do here. We're also launching an e-newsletter, so Excel is a very compatible version with the online survey tool or e-newsletter marketing tool that we'll be using.
Okay. Do you see any kind of a reason to do sharing between the volunteer databases? Do you see that as a high priority item or a low priority item from your point of view?
My point of view is that definitely there's an opportunity. I think there's sometimes, especially when you're thinking of national organizations, for example, the Heart and Stroke, the month of February is their Heart Month, and so they have opportunities right across Canada and quite frankly here in Ontario that are exactly the same. So it would certainly save a lot of work for the agency of not having to input those volunteer opportunities into multiple databases and only to do it once and reflect on what communities they are going to be reflected in.
Right. I think it's definitely a trickier proposal in the volunteer software because you have to attach it to a community or a community information record as well, and getting that lined up correctly is a lot more challenging, which is part of why we don't have that tool there now. So it will certainly take a lot of consideration. But something like the Excel output and even some of our other export formats in terms of getting the data out are pretty simple for us to consider for the volunteer software. It wouldn't be a lot of effort to do that for you. So Julia, You have to deal with this more than anyone. Do you have any comments? I don't know. Anyway, is there anyone else that, oh, I've got a question from Jennifer, just a moment. Jennifer's asking, how close are we to working in one back-end database for the province? Well, whether everyone is in one database is really a big question, because there's no plan to force everyone into one database. So although we are working to what we call a multi-member model, which would allow more than one CIOC member in the same database, that will still be optional. So it's not going to take away from having the tool, and I don't think it means that we're going to get rid of it, but I believe that the development committee is going to release the proposed features for the first round of what we call the multi-member database model for comment. And that is both for people who would be interested in going in together that are separate now, and also for those of our members who are in a merged database but were formerly their own members and would like to find out a bit about what it would mean for them to have their own membership but still stay in the same database. So that's coming out. I don't think it's going to take away from the sharing format. I don't think it's going to mean that we don't have those tools. But if you want information on how record sharing is going to work in that model, then when this document goes out, which it should be going out pretty soon because it's already written, you can take a look at what that model looks like. And I don't know, because it's you know, would everybody go into Ontario CIOC? Because if Find Help continues to want their own database that they host themselves, then everyone's going to continue to have to share to them. So it's unfortunately, because that's just not a clear path for us, I think we still need to consider how these sharing models work.
And Kate, it's Sharon. So we're talking specifically about the CIC side, right?
Yes.
Anything else?
Well, so in terms of the multi-member databases, you mean?
Yes.
Oh, no, well, that's everybody. So the idea of the model is that people can continue to have their own separate membership where they're divided and they have their own stuff that they own, but that behind the scenes you're actually in one database and you have the ability to give limited access to other members that are in the same database as you without actually having to import and export, because you're really in the same database. But you preserve most of your private settings and your own control over your own setup and so on.
So how would that work on the Vol side?
It would be just the same. I mean, the idea is that you would continue to exist as you do now, pretty much independently. With you would only see all your own records. You would see all your own views and templates and setup items, and but behind the scenes, you're actually in a single database. So
okay.
Unless you see the full proposal, which is like 5 pages long with a huge amount of information in it, it's really hard for me to explain. But the idea is that we want. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, now, if a group of CICs are in a single database with however many independent sort of membership-y things they may choose to have, but supposing they effectively are in a single database, and there are several volunteer applications attached, or independent organizations that have volunteer opportunities, do they too have to be in a single database with membership of their own? In other words, can they still exist separate from their CIC host if their host is living with someone else who also has a volunteer module? Does that make sense?
No, if their CIC merged in, they would have to go along. But they stay as independent as they are now.
Yeah, but effectively, behind the scenes, if there were 3 vol modules and 5 CICs, if the 5 CICs merge, the 3 vols effectively are merged, although they could maintain their own independence regardless, in terms of setup and all of that sort of thing.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. So from their perspective, they would still, to them it would still seem like they're on their own, pretty much, and they would maintain their own membership and everything. So, but behind the scenes, from a technical perspective, they're all in one database. But again, this is not, I don't want to get too much into that because it's going to be separate discussions. And the fact is, we don't have any guarantee from anyone that they're going to agree to be in one database. So it would be premature to make plans based on everyone being together when we have no agreement, and CIOC will not force people to go into one database if they don't want to.
The other thing that's going to have to come into account as well, of course, is that we have members outside of Ontario who may in particular not have an interest in living in one database with the Ontario folk. Yeah. They may perceive a benefit to not be in one database.
Yeah. And we absolutely do have at least some members that cannot be in the same database as others for privacy reasons, and just because of the way they operate. So we will never have just one CIOC database that all our members are in. That will never, ever happen because it goes against our members' requirements. But we do anticipate that there will be fewer databases if some of our members agree to occupy one database. But the idea is not that they would give up their membership, that everyone would preserve their membership and have their own private area in the software. But again, this is getting really off track because it's going to be a separate discussion. So if it's okay with everyone, I'd like to pause on the one database thing because that's going to be a separate discussion from this one. And if we can just go right into the import-export, if there's any further comments on that.
Hi, Kate. It's Julia. I couldn't mute myself before. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I like what I see with this new non-public status function, the enhancements. It's going to be a lot easier to deal with non-public and deleted records, I think, on our end here at Find Help. I don't think I have any real questions yet.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I was excited to see the enhancement for the non-public deleted records.
Right. And do the other things pretty much go in line with the issues that you are dealing with now? Is there anything that you find is an issue now that I haven't covered?
No, I don't think so. Not that I can think of. Emil, are you on the call still? Because Emil does a lot of our importing, exporting stuff, so I asked him to join the call as well.
Yeah, I don't think has entered his audio pin or...
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I have him there. He's in my list, but no, it doesn't show that his audio is connected. So if he types a question, I can watch out for it.
Okay, but yeah, I don't have any questions so far.
Okay, great. Anything else from anyone?
Yeah, I'm interested in how many of the other people who are on the call are doing importing and exporting themselves currently. Because I think often when there's data sharing going on, what has ended up happening is that folks have merged into a database together, and they may not be doing import-export very much. I know that we feel quite dependent on it and would keenly like it to be better. But I don't know whether others are actively doing it. I'd be really interested to know that.
I don't know. I know I use it. we still rely on it to even do things like database mergers or bring in our new members and things. So from the perspective of, as a support worker for CIOC, I use this tool all the time. So I'm very reliant on this.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, honestly, is that probably, like as we have in our area, not necessarily recognized how much we can exploit import-export to make our data management more efficient by eliminating duplications across geographies. We've identified in the neighborhood of quite literally hundreds of records. When we look at all of our potential colleagues and data sharing partners around the province, we could be not only sharing our data out, but bringing data in that would mean that we weren't having to maintain our independent copies of some records that are common. And then the other piece is for records that we know we all have, like the Kids Help Phone is always the one we use as an example, but it is a good example that if we agreed among ourselves who would maintain that record and it got shared out to all of us, these kinds of things can really make data management efficient. And if the tools support doing that readily, then I believe that we will enjoy doing much more of that than we may be doing now, just because it's a bulky, sort of awkward beast of a thing to do.
Yeah, and that'll also reduce duplication of stuff on 211ontario.ca, wherein partners are sending records outside of their specific catchment areas.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it really, if anybody looks at their own records, ones that are located in their communities that serve beyond their community, it's a potential share out, and ones that are not located in their community but are being maintained by someone else as well, it's a potential share in, and it's surprising how much of our data falls into those two categories.
And there seems to be other interest from other people for that, but how would you propose that you as a group would begin the process of identifying what you should all be sharing with each other?
It's daunting. Yeah. I'm not quite sure. I mean, when I look at what we've done in Hamilton, we looked at everything that was located elsewhere and tried to identify whether or not those records existed in our colleagues' databases. And then once we identified that they did, then we just put a little bit of a tag on it for future potential sharing. And then the other piece was looking at our own records that served outside of the Hamilton community with a view to offering them to the communities that are served. Our hospitals would be a good example of that, and other people's, I'm sure, as well, and some other provincial programs or provincially mandated programs that serve our area office catchment and so on. I'm sure we all actually have lots of those things.
So, to that end, would you be interested in having a report produced for each database based on the area served of the records that you have, which of your records fall under the catchment of all of the other CIOC members? Because we could do that.
Oh, God, that sounds magical.
Well, we could.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I could produce you a report that showed, you know, which of your records serve Niagara, which of your records serve Halton, which of your records serve Haldimand, which of your records serve, you know, the city of Toronto, like all of that. And that could be produced for every member. And you could then, you know, both review your own report and review other reports to see what they've got. And ideally, you then go through the reporting, you know, of another member and say, yes, I have this record, I have this record, I have this record, and you can decide between the two of you who should be owning it.
That would be.
Yeah, and I mean, we basically are doing ours based on geography, but I think one of the things that probably most of us would be interested in are what are the records that Find Help is keeping that are sort of provincial service areas that might be able to be shared out. Because we do lots of sharing into Toronto, and not that we resent it in any way, Julia. We love sharing. We do. But there hasn't been anything coming in the other direction, and I do think that there's quite a big potential for things to come in the other direction with a bit of thought being put to it.
Yeah, and one of the things when you do that is understanding, let's say Find Help doesn't keep all the fields that you do, you can still keep those extra fields yourself. So even if they're sharing, 80% of the record with you and you have 20% fields that they don't keep, you can keep just those 20%.
Yeah, and we could keep it for our own, collections and all of the various potential uses that we might put it to. And I think one of the things about the kind of sharing that we've envisioned in CIOC is that capacity to share records out, to acknowledge who the manager of the record is in the record itself when it's in use, and we share freely with one another. If we start getting into fees and things like that, I think it'll get ugly. But free sharing, except for Find Help, of course, who's very welcome to pay fees to us.
Well, if it's a value to the community, we can investigate whether it's worth Chris and I taking the, maybe half a day it would take to create reports within Ontario of which records serve out, other members' service areas, and for each member, and we can in fact try and do some automated matching if the names are the same, and say, yes, they have this record, here's the record number.
I think it's worth doing down the line a bit. I don't know that this would be the moment, and I'm sure you're not offering it now.
Well, the thing is, it doesn't take very long, but I don't think it's worth doing unless people actually are committed that they're going to do something with that information. If people are really thinking, yes, this is something we should be pursuing in a serious way, and we actually want to investigate these partnerships of sharing records, then it's worth taking the time to create these reports. Basically, anyone who has a buy-in and says, yes, we want to pursue this, we would then create a report for them and go forward from there. But it's not, as I say, it's not, from a technical perspective for us, creating the reports doesn't take very long compared to how long it would take you to try and put something together yourself. The difference is crazy. I mean, it would take you probably weeks just to compare yourself with your immediate neighbors, whereas we could produce a report for all of you in a morning, right? So, but
well, I'm certainly really interested in that, but I'm not going to ask that you do it just for me. How about other people? And we might want to poll the CIOC membership in a broader sense and see if this is something people want to pursue. Because you're right, you don't want to be spending the time doing it if everybody just said what a lovely spreadsheet and tucked it away somewhere never to look at it again.
Actually, Kate, can I make a suggestion, Kate? Because you mentioned there's like a 5-page document that's talking about the multi-member databases. Is this maybe a recommendation you can include in that?
Oh no, totally unrelated. Totally unrelated.
How so? We're talking about multi-member sharing of data records, and so this would be.
That's what's on now. I mean, the sharing is actually when you're not in the same database, so they're really disconnected. This sharing is for people who are not in the same database, and the multi-member database is about. It's really a technical thing where you exist in a single database, in a single copy of the software, but they're not really related at all. Even if everyone is in one database, if you all wanted to keep duplicates of records, you could. They're not the same issue. Like if we had, say, as we do now, 2 Peel members, you could have two Peel members in the same database, and they could have double copies of everything, and that would be whatever.
But I guess what I'm saying is I'm almost siding with what Leslie is saying, is maybe this can be put forward as a recommendation before you put forward the effort, just to make sure this, because there could be other members across Canada that would say, hey, this would be great to have you know, and make sure you do a bit of a polling before you go off and just do it for a couple of members.
Yeah, no, well, if we put the investment in to create the reporting tool, then it's not, you would just run it on whoever wanted, you know, at any time. It's sort of an upfront, you know, you write the tool to make the report, and then you can run it as many times as you want.
Kate, it's Mark.
You wouldn't have to know ahead of time.
I'm just wondering if I could comment, having done quite a bit of this work for the Hamilton database, trying to kind of identify duplicates and such. The reporting isn't so difficult for the actual identification of records so much as the matching. So that would be, I think, where the value would be, and what KCL might be able to do is, you know, if you've got a record that's located, geographically located outside of an area, does that database have a match? Like for, say, a record in the Hamilton database that's located in Toronto. That assumes, of course, you know, that there's going to be sharing in all directions, because I'm sure if Toronto shared out, we'd reduce about 30% of our records across the province. That's my guess. So.
I think the other piece of this as well is that you and Mark could certainly attest to this, that in some cases we found records in our database that were located in other communities, but in fact the other community didn't have a record. And so our capacity to be able to take that record that was located, and Glynis, I'll use Burlington as an example, not because we found any, but just because you're our neighbor. Supposing we had a record that was geographically in Burlington that Glynis in Burlington didn't have, you know, the first step, seems to me, would be to give it to her and let her take over the management of it, and then let her share it back to us. You see what I'm getting at here? That even when you don't find a match, doesn't mean there still isn't a potential to share if Glynis in Burlington wanted to have that record and just didn't even realize that she was missing it until we were so kind as to point it out to her. So there is, and maybe a poll of the membership or something on the message board. Who knows what? This to gauge interest would be very much worth doing.
Glynis was actually suggesting that we send out an alert, just poll for interest. I think it gives us a better indication of you know, how to make investments in the tools as well, because if people are using them more, then it certainly it makes any investment in them a bit more worthwhile. So
there are definitely some efficiencies to be found in making good use of these tools.
I don't know about technology-wise. This is Diane speaking. But one suggestion, you know, when you dream, that came up when I was part of the team working on the subject record style guide was, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a central repository for, and we were speaking specifically about subject records, but a central repository for these records that everyone in the, you know, in Ontario might want to share. And when you think of all the government records, probably we all have certain programs in our databases, and that if there could be a central repository that people could just go and say, oh, there, I need that, and be able to import, and, you know, that the agencies where these services were located would, you know, volunteer to take care of the updating, but they would be readily available. So there'd be one central place that people could go instead of this individual exporting and importing between, you know, community information centers or what have you. So that was the pie in the sky. Could we have a central repository somewhere for these records that everyone might like access to, and some sort of an agreement about who would actually keep them updated?
Right. Is it your thought that you want them to be self-serve, or that you would simply report the ones that you use and therefore you would get them every time they got updated?
Oh, well, that would be even more wonderful. I was thinking self-serve, or, you know, if people are posting records, you know, that would be available, to, you know, through that repository, that perhaps there'd be an announcement system, you know, that these certain records are now available, and people could you know, handpick them what they were wanting for their database. So they say this is just, you know, pie in the sky dreaming, and I don't know what technology is available that could, you know, serve that sort of purpose. So.
Yeah, the process idea here, if we take, you know, the enhancements that we're talking about making and the discussion that we're having about eliminating duplication, the process model that I think we're shooting for in the long term is that I set up you know, profiles for sharing with any number of different agencies that I share with. They tell me the records that they want, and then in an automated way, when I update the records that they want, they get sent new copies. And
that'd be
the same
wonderful.
in reverse, right? And so it's sort of a web of sharing instead of just not a central repository model, because then everything has to get updated in the central repository, but rather a web model where people are in control of what makes sense for their area, so what their catchment is. So if a record is in Hamilton, then it's in Hamilton's catchment, but that record may apply to many people throughout the province, and they would have a sharing agreement with various people of whatever those people wanted from Hamilton, and anytime Hamilton updated their record, it would automatically go out to all those people that they had the agreement with and update their copies. Right?
That would be
that's where I think we're trying to go in the long term. So, and some of that will be taken care of if we get into, you know, more and more people into the multi-member, but you'll still have the same thing happening in the multi-member where it's what when you see the documents, it's like it's a sharing profile, so you'll say I'm sharing these records with these people. So it'll be the same kind of thing, except instead of exporting, it's sharing. So you still have that same control or access list of saying, okay, I have allowed this agency access to these records, and they can do these things with it. So even in a multi-member database model, it's the same theory of the web of sharing. So whether that's done through export or whether that's done in a multi-member database there's not a lot of difference in terms of, you know, deciding who gets the record and you know, what you want to give them, basically, what fields and so on. So anyway, I'm taking it from there. There's obviously multiple steps to this, and we need to decide what kind of investment we want to make in terms of automation, because there's multiple different things you can do to improve it. You know, like full automation where you don't even think about it, it just gets updated, there's no human involved, or at minimum you can at least make the process easier for the human beings involved so that they don't have to think so much about what they're sending, where they can just say, oh, I'm doing my weekly export to Hamilton, give me everything that's new that I said I share with Hamilton. At least then you're taking the thinking out of the sharing, even if it isn't fully automated. So there's stages along the way, even if we don't go all the way to it's completely automatic and you don't even think about it, you just say, I share this record with Hamilton, and off it goes. There's still a partial way there where you say, these are the records I share with Hamilton, these are the fields that I share, and you know, give me everything that new that needs to be sent to Hamilton, because the software automatically knows which records Hamilton gets and which fields you share with them and when the last time you sent them an export was and everything that's changed since the last time you sent it to them, so that there is not a lot involved in that process.
That would be amazing, Kate.
So that's what I hope will happen with the kinds of changes I'm suggesting here. So that's where we want it to go. Okay, any other comments, questions? Jennifer, I think, wanted to follow up with Julia about the public and non-public, or public and deleted and so on. So Jennifer, I'd suggest following up offline with Julia about how they're handling it currently. I have the recommended practice for how to do non-public and deleted and sharing that's posted on the CIOC member site. So that's my recommendation about how you should be doing the process, but I don't know what the current process that Julie is using is. So I would say follow up with her offline and you can get confirmation that way. Emil is asking how automation would work with Ontario CIOC. So automation, if we go that far, would be at the discretion of the parties. So both parties would have to agree to the automation, but basically, you know, either nightly scheduled or weekly scheduled, it would automatically look for records that you share that have changed and send the changed records and update them without a human being involved. So you would get the report in the same way that when I run an import now, I can get access to a report that tells me about the imports that I've done, right? So I can see my completed report that says which records were imported and if there were any issues during the import. So you would still get access to that kind of reporting because it would still run things in the same way that it does now, and really you would make choices when you set up the automation, the same choices you can make when you import records about what to do with a privacy profile or what to do if there's a conflict between your record owner and their record owner, and all those things that you make decisions on now when you import. You would set that up as part of the automation, and so it would do all of the same things that a human being does now, except it would just do it automatically overnight instead of someone actually having to export a file, send the file by email, import the file, run the import. It would just happen automatically. Another question. Emil's asking, does it matter that Ontario CIOC is outside the shared server? No, not at all. Wouldn't matter. We actually do, we have one of our members that does an automated, it's not a CIOC import. They have a different system that they have to share data into CIOC with, and they do nightly updates from a completely different system located in a totally different part of the country. So no problem. That wouldn't matter that you're on a separate server. We would use a similar model to what we do with that member, where it would all be done on a secure connection over the internet. That's how we do theirs. Okay, any other questions? Okay, because we do have a couple of people on this call that haven't been on previous sessions, I just want to explain a little bit about how the information that we gather here, you know, what happens to it. So we have a recording of the session. We also have notes from the session, and the PowerPoint will be updated at some point with all the sort of meeting minutes of our session that we had here today, plus any comments that we receive after the session. So if you think of something after the session is over, and you want to email us, post on the board, whatever, that would get added in as well as documentation about the sort of response and feedback that we got about the session. We'll be taking all of the suggested enhancements we get from all of the 22, 23 sessions, I think it is, that we're doing, and those will go into a tool for capturing our members' priorities, where our members will then get an opportunity to actually say, you know, how important each kind of change to the software is to them. And that then goes back to the development committee to make a decision about which things can be funded within this project. That isn't to say that things that can't be funded within this project won't get done. They would just then go into our regular process for evaluating and doing enhancements. So that may mean being member funded or getting into CIOC's long-term queue for what work is done with CIOC member funds and so on. So we can't guarantee that everything we're saying here today, or anything in fact that we're saying here today, is actually going to happen. Only that we will document it. We'll give our members an opportunity to tell us how important each of those things are to them. And then that information will be used by the development committee to make decisions for the second part of the project about which things will get done within the project scope. And everything else will still be documented and still be part of our normal enhancements process. Okay, so I don't want anyone who isn't aware thinking that, oh, here's our we're going to do these things we promise, and that's not really the case. But we do promise that you'll get an opportunity to indicate how important these items are to you. So if it is important, please make sure you're involved in the process for collecting feedback about priority. Otherwise, you may not get what you want. Okay, are there any other questions, comments, anything else? Okay, is it the desire of this group that I provide a bit of a summary email to the alert list about the potential for a data sharing report that would analyze records in their service areas across the membership? Is that something that you would like me to follow up with?
I would say yes from my perspective. Although I am also conscious of the fact that you've got lots to do. So I guess we should make sure that people aren't expecting it to happen in the next, 10 minutes or anything.
Well, and we have to decide, how does that fit into, the work that CIOC's doing. But I do think that people at least need to be aware that this is a possibility. So I'll try and be clear in the email that all I'm doing is making people aware that this is a possibility and that we would have to make arrangements about when and how much it would cost and all of that to actually put that together.
Okay. No, I think it would be good to especially when one puts it together with the enhancements that we hope for the import-export, that the combination of those two pieces really does have some very great potential to be helpful to people.
Okay, well, if there's no questions, I'm going to end the session. Thank you very much for attending. If you think of something after the fact, please feel free to email me, post on the message board, email a member of the development committee. Whatever message you would like to follow up would be fine. Thanks very much for attending, and again, we have the next dozen sessions have been posted. If you did not see that, please make sure that you review the list of sessions and sign up for the next batch of sessions that you would like to attend that go till the end of March.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kate.
Thank you.